Welcome to the WinShuttle Query 11 training. In this training, we'll be covering the basics of WinShuttle Query 11 to help you get started using the product. We'll also talk a little bit about what has changed in the new version 11, which will benefit those of you who have been using one of the previous 10.x versions. That being said, we'll be starting from the very basics, so no prior experience with WinShuttle Query is required. So, what exactly is WinShuttle Query? WinShuttle Query enables live data extraction from SAP to Excel. The extracted data can then be used for various reporting needs or for mass maintenance. WinShuttle Query provides internal mechanisms which ensure that the user-generated queries are secure and have a minimal impact on SAP performance. When combined with WinShuttle Transaction, users will be able to create complex, automated data round-trip processes. Now, if you have already been using a WinShuttle Transaction to read data from SAP, you might be wondering what is the difference between the two products. Well, with WinShuttle Transaction, you can perform simple, unconditional read operations for fields that are available in the SAP transaction you are using. And you will always need to provide at least one input value, like a material number, for instance, which means you will need to explicitly specify which SAP records you want to read data from. As an example, you could create a script with WinShuttle Transaction that reads all the basic data fields for the materials you have listed in Excel. Now, with WinShuttle Query, you can create much more complex and dynamic searches using various conditions and logical operators. WinShuttle Query reads the data directly from the SAP tables, so you are not limited by what fields are available in any given transaction. Queries can read data from multiple tables, and the queries can be linked together, enabling you to run very complex searches. With WinShuttle Query, any data field can be used as a search filter, which enables you to really drill down and extract the data you need. For example, you could build a query that reads the details for all materials within a certain material number range, materials that were created in a certain year, where the material description contains the word equipment, and where the gross weight of the material is less than 100 kilograms, for example. So the queries can be a lot more complex. If you have been using a previous version of WinShuttle Query, here's a quick summary of the major changes in version 11. First of all, WinShuttle Studio is now a single program that includes all the WinShuttle desktop products. And then the feature availability is controlled by the user licenses, which simplifies installation as you no longer need separate installers for developers and end users. The look and feel of the application has also been changed to make it look more in line with Microsoft Office, meaning Query now uses a ribbon-style interface and a proper embedded Excel worksheet. The administrator options are also gone, so users can start using the application straight away without limitations to the number of tables and table joins that they can use. To start creating a new query script, open WinShuttle Studio 11 and select New from the File menu. Choose Query and Create from Tables as the creation method. WinShuttle Query allows you to create queries from tables, info sets, or logical databases. Alternatively, a query can also be created from a recording. But the Create from Tables option will be your go-to method for query creation and the focus of this training. Once you have selected the query method, you will be prompted to select the target SAP system and provide your credentials. So fill in your username and password and then press Log on to SAP to continue. Once connected to the SAP system, press the Create Script button to start building the script. The default data type will be Excel, but WinShuttle Query also supports Access, Text, and XML form data types as well. But in our example, we will be building an Excel template for our query, so we can continue with the default data type. This will open up the main workspace view of Winshuttle query. The workspace view will change depending on what step of the query creation process you are in. But the first order of business will be to start adding tables to your workspace by using the panel on the right. But before we start adding tables, a quick side note here. The main challenge in building queries lies in finding the correct SAP tables that store the data you are interested in. The query builder does offer some tools that can help you with locating the tables, but here are a few quick tips that you might find useful. First of all, you can try looking up the table name in SAP GUI by highlighting a field and pressing F1. This will open up the Performance Assistant. From there, you can access the technical information screen, which will often show the table name where the data for the selected field is stored. However, due to how SAP is structured, this is not always the case. Alternatively, if you have an existing automation script created with Winshuttle transaction, you could try looking up the table names in the expert mapper view of the transaction. Or you can try creating a new recording in Winshuttle query to help locate the SAP table names. The online SAP community network is also a very good resource when you need to help finding a field or table name. So, the first thing we will need to do is add some tables to our query. There are a few alternative ways you can go about doing this. If you already know the name of the table, you can simply type it in the quick add box and press the Add to Workspace button. Or you can use the built-in search features to locate the table. You can, for instance, run a keyword search for names and descriptions of tables and fields, then pick up the table you want to add to your query from the search results at the bottom of the screen. In the example shown here, we are searching for tables that have the keyword material in the table description. Luckily, in this case, the results show only one matching table, which also happens to be the table we're looking for, so we can go ahead and add it to our query by clicking the Add to Workspace button. A third option is to use the data dictionary to look up the table you want to add. The tables in the dictionary are grouped by SAP module and transaction code to make browsing easier. So if we wanted to locate the general material data table, we would find it under Material Management or the MM01 group in the data dictionary. The dictionary will not show the table descriptions by default, so use the Synchronize feature to update the dictionary. Note that this might take some time to complete, so we recommend only synchronizing one group or one category of tables at a time. Simply repeat the process for every table you want to add to your query. Winshuttle query will automatically join the tables together where applicable. The table joins can be removed or changed by right-clicking the connector line and selecting Remove or Convert to Left Outer Join. By default, Winshuttle query adds all the possible joins between the tables, so the recommendation is to remove the unnecessary ones manually. Multiple redundant joins can decrease the performance of the query when extracting data from multiple tables. Once all the tables have been added, you can start picking which fields you want to read from SAP and which fields you want to use as search criteria filters. Use the checkboxes to mark the fields you want to read as output fields, and use the criteria checkbox to indicate search criteria fields. The selection is not mutually exclusive, so a field can be both an output field and a criteria field. In our example here, we've picked a handful of output fields and 2 criteria fields, the material number and the language key. If you're dealing with large tables, you can sort the table fields to your liking by right-clicking the table title, the search box right below the title bar can also be used to quickly locate a field you want to add. Choosing the Inspect Table option will open up the table in a more detailed view, which can be helpful if you are having trouble finding the correct fields in the table. Once you have selected all the output and criteria fields you want to use in your query, switch to the Criteria tab to start configuring how you want the criteria fields to be used. Since we picked material number and language key as our two criteria fields earlier, those two fields show up here. The criteria controls include multiple logical operators that are used to specify how the criteria fields are used in your query. For instance, you can configure the query to return only values in a specific range, values that are larger or smaller than a certain value, or values that contain a certain text string, and so on, so on. Multiple conditions can be added for each criteria field. Press the Add Condition button and select whether this condition will be inclusive or exclusive. Combining multiple conditions in this manner allows you to create complex queries that help you really drill down and extract the exact data you need. The conditions can either be user-definable or fixed, or alternatively, the values can be read from an Excel file. The example shown here shows a query that has been configured to extract data for all materials between ADS 0000 and ADS 999, where the language key equals EN for English. Both of these are set as user configurable, so when we run the query, these will be the pre-filled search criteria. But the user can still change these values at runtime if needed. So depending on the use case, sometimes you will want to have flexible queries with user adjustable criteria, and other times you might want to use fixed values to create more restricted queries that are only used for certain specific purposes. The SAP lookup feature allows users to look up valid options for the criteria field at runtime. This works more or less like pressing F4 in SAP GUI to display a list of valid values for the selected field. This lookup can then be configured either to be disabled, optional, or mandatory. Once you have finished configuring all the criteria, use the Preview Run button to test your query. This will run the query and display the first 100 matching records in the data preview window. The fact that the results are limited in the preview makes this a quick and useful tool to use when initially testing your search criteria. The final step before you can run the query is to create an Excel template and map the SAP data fields to it. Open the Mapper tab and simply start dragging and dropping SAP fields to the empty spreadsheet one by one. Alternatively, you can use the little drop-down menu to select the column you wish to map that field to. Either way, make sure to map each field to a unique column. Simply repeat this for all the fields in your query. And you should end up with something like this, where all the fields are mapped to unique Excel cells. These can all be modified later on, so you can always come back here and redo the field mappings if needed. Once you're done with the mapping, switch to the Run tab to specify the query run settings. Here you can specify the sheet name, start row, and the number of records to be extracted. In most cases, the default options are fine. You can also lock these settings to prevent the runner users from adjusting these once the query has been finalized and published. The Write Records option controls whether running subsequent queries should append the new results to the end of the Excel file or override the previous query results. The number of entries will check how many records the query will be extracting. This can be a useful tool for testing large queries just to get an estimate of how many records would be extracted without actually needing to run the full query and extract all the data. Once the run settings have been configured, press the Run button to execute the query. Again, you'll get prompted to select the SAP system and provide your SAP credentials. After which, the runtime variable wizard screen will show up. Here we can adjust the search criteria for the fields that were configured as user definable when setting up the criteria conditions earlier. So in this case we have the material number range and the language key here. And pressing OK will execute the query with the selected or criteria defined above. And after the query has been run, the results will be displayed here in the built-in spreadsheet along with a log of the run. Let's next have a look at what building a simple query looks like in product. So I have WinShuttle Studio 11 open here, and I will go ahead and start creating a new query using the create from tables function. After which I'll need to provide my SAP credentials as well as, of course, select the system I want to extract the data from. Studio 11 allows you to store credentials for each system, so I can simply, because I've done that earlier, can pick one of the systems here and use the auto logon feature. We'll use the default Excel data type, so I can just click on the create script button to actually start building the query and go to the main query workspace view. So if I already know the name of the table I want to extract data from, I can use the quick add feature here, or like discussed earlier, I could run a search for table names or descriptions here using the search feature, or alternatively I could browse through the data dictionary and try to find the table here within these structures. In the previous examples we had built a simple query to retrieve data from the material table, so let's do something different here. Let's maybe do something with cost centers. So I'll go ahead and add one table here to get some cost centers and add that to our workspace, because I know the CSKS table contains the main cost center data, and then let's add another one. CSKT will contain additional text data related to cost centers. So there we go. So now we have these two tables here, and if I move these around, you can see these. There are three joins between these tables. 3 joins were automatically added here by WinShuttle query. In smaller, simpler queries, it doesn't really make that much of a difference, but as a good rule of thumb or a general recommendation, you might want to clean up these joins by removing unnecessary ones. So for instance, I could remove these few extra joins and leave the one main table join here, the one that links these tables by using the cost center name. Next, I'll need to pick some output and criteria fields from these tables. So for the cost center master data table, let's say I wanna pick cost center, controlling area, company code. Let's do a couple more. Valid from date. Let's do business area. Those will be my output fields, and then I want to pick a couple of criteria fields that will be used as search filters. Let's do controlling area company code and the cost center, we'll add those as criteria fields as well. And then from the text table, let's say we'll use the language key as a criteria, so we'll limit that to a certain language, and then we'll get the general name and description as the two output fields here. Once we've selected the output and criteria fields here, we can move on to the next step and specify how we want to use these selected criteria fields in our query. So we'll switch to the criteria tab here and start configuring our criteria conditions. So for a controlling area, I can specify a condition using all these various logical operators. Let's say I want to limit my search results to a certain single controlling area and a single company code, so I can use the equals operator here and fill in the value I want, let's say controlling area 1000, and I can further specify whether this is a user-defined field, which means that the users can later on adjust this at runtime, change this to a different controlling area, or if I were to set it as a fixed value, the users would not be able to later change this. The search or the query would always extract records where the controlling area equals 1000. But I'll leave this as user defined. I'll do the same for the company code. So basically we'll just have a sort of a default value here as 1000, but since it's user defined, the users can at runtime adjust this if needed. For the cost center name, we'll use a slightly different condition here. Let's say to further limit our results, I'll use a like operator, and I'll limit this or use this criteria to filter out all other cost centers except the ones that start with, let's say, ADS, and then I'll use the asterisk as a wildcard here. So essentially this will only extract all cost centers that begin with the letters ADS. And then we have one more criteria field, the language key, and I'll simply set that as English, and let's mark that as a fixed value, so it's not user adjustable at runtime. At this point, we can use the preview button or feature here to quickly test whether our criteria conditions work and whether the results are what we're looking for. So this brings up sort of the runtime wizard that we will be seeing later on once we are actually running the query. But here we can see how our criteria are currently working, and then I can just leave them as is and click on the preview run button to see how this works, and that will hopefully give us some results in the data preview window below, like so. So as you see, it's if you look at the results, it's only retrieving cost centers that start with letters ADS and where the controlling area and company code is 1000 and so on. So this preview is limited to a maximum of 100 records. So this is just a quick testing tool. We'll of course need to later on further test this once we have finalized this query to actually see that it retrieves all the records we want. But for now, we are happy with the results, so we can move on to the mapping phase by switching to the mapper tab here. So now I'll just go ahead and drag and drop these fields in whatever order I feel is most useful for the users. So probably want to start with cost center, so let's drag it over to the A column. Then let's do these more or less in whatever order they showed up here. There's also an auto map feature here that could be used to automatically map these columns to Excel, but manually doing them one at a time gives you you full control over the order in which you want the columns or data fields mapped to Excel here. So I used the drag and drop feature. Alternatively, you could use the little drop down menus here to select which Excel cell you want to map each SAP field to. Now I'm happy with the mapping, so I can move on to the run section here, where I can configure how this query will be run. I'm happy with the default options. I will be extracting all the records and starting from row 2, since row 1 will of course be the header data row here containing the titles, which can also be adjusted. Doesn't really matter what the title is. You could change how it looks, what the exact text there is, change the colors and fonts however you want. But let's just go ahead and test our little cost center script here by clicking on the button. At this point, you'll get prompted to save your query. At this point, we'll be working with 2 separate files. There will be an Excel file, the data template. I'll just use the default naming conventions, so I'll just hit the save button. Then we'll also have a separate query file, which I'll also save. Later on, we can publish the query once it's finalized and properly tested. We can publish it, which means that the query script will be embedded into the Excel file. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So let's just now run our query script here and see how that works. So now this brings up the runtime variable wizard, where we have the default values we specified in the criteria conditions. So this could be now, since these few of these are user adjustable, I could change this to another controlling area if I wanted, but let's leave that as 1000. I can change the company code, cost center, but the language key we set as a fixed value, so I now do not have the option of manually changing it here. Since we have the SAP lookup also enabled, I could press this button here, which will actually connect to SAP and fetch all the valid values for this field, and then I could select the correct controlling area from that list. But let's just go ahead and click OK to actually execute this query and see how many records we get here and how long it takes. So there we go, 201 records extracted. So looks like our query works. If it doesn't, then at this point you could go back, start fixing the tables, redo the mapping, whatever's needed to get it to display or extract the exact data you need. But if it is now doing what it is you wanted to do, extracting the data you need, then you would move on to the publishing of this script.